Walt Disney's fame during his lifetime and after his death in 1966 created a unique public interest in his family. By the time his empire of animated films, theme parks, and television productions had become global icons of the 20th century, the Disney name carried a cultural weight far beyond the boundaries of Hollywood. His personal life, although carefully protected, was inevitably tied to the vast company he co-founded. Every detail about his children, their lives, and their choices drew attention because of what Walt Disney represented. Not just a man, but a symbol of American imagination. The confirmed fact is simple. Walt Disney and his wife, Lillian Bounds Disney, had two daughters, Diane Marie Disney, born on December 18, 1933, in Los Angeles, and Sharon May Disney, born on December 31, 1936, adopted shortly after her birth. These were the only children of Walt and Lillian, and their lives would unfold under the quiet shadow of one of the most famous fathers of the 20th century. One often overlooked detail is the extent to which Walt Disney shielded his daughters from the public eye during their formative years. Unlike the children of other Hollywood figures who sometimes became part of the entertainment machinery, the Disney girls were raised with deliberate privacy. Walt Disney wanted them to experience as normal a childhood as possible. The family lived in a spacious house in the Holmby Hills neighborhood of Los Angeles, yet they were not paraded before the press. When Walt designed Disneyland, he famously tested ideas on his daughters, taking them to local amusement parks and watching their reactions. Their laughter, boredom, or excitement helped shape the eventual design of rides and attractions. In that sense, Diane and Sharon were not only his children, but also quiet contributors to the creation of Disneyland itself. A debated point among historians concerns how deeply Walt Disney intended his daughters to be involved in the family business. Some biographers, such as Neil Gabler, have suggested that Walt never envisioned them taking direct control of the company, instead hoping they would lead private lives. Others point out that the daughters, particularly Diane, later became guardians of the Disney legacy, suggesting that Walt did instill a sense of responsibility about preserving his name and heritage. The truth seems to fall somewhere in between. Walt encouraged independence, but remained protective of the empire he had built, not wanting it to be seen as a family dynasty in the traditional sense. This duality of shielding them from public exposure while simultaneously linking them to his vision would define much of the daughters' later lives. Diane and Sharon carried the burden of a last name synonymous with imagination, while also carving out identities distinct from their father's work. From these early decisions of Walt and Lillian, the story of the Disney daughters began to unfold in ways both private and profoundly connected to the cultural institution their father had created. As time passed and the company grew larger, the focus would shift more clearly to Diane, the elder daughter, whose role in arts and heritage preservation ensured her position as a public steward of her father's legacy. Walt Disney and his wife, Lillian Disney, built a family life that contrasted sharply with the scale of Walt's professional ambitions. Their union began in 1925, when Lillian, then working as an ink artist at the Disney Studio, married Walt. The couple initially lived modestly in Los Angeles, moving several times as Walt's fortunes rose. By the 1930s, Walt's creative output was flourishing, and with that stability, the couple began their family. The first daughter, Diane Marie Disney, was born on December 18, 1933, at the Cedars of Lebanon Hospital in Los Angeles. Her birth was a significant moment for Walt and Lillian, who had long hoped for children. Diane grew up during the period when Walt was transforming his studio from a small animation company into a dominant force in entertainment. She spent her earliest years while her father was creating classics such as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937, and Pinocchio, 1940. Unlike the characters her father brought to life, Diane was raised quietly, with Walt and Lillian protecting her from the intense media spotlight. 3 years later, the family grew again, though not through birth, but adoption. Sharon May Disney was born on December 31st, 1936, and was adopted by Walt and Lillian shortly after. The decision to adopt, while rarely discussed publicly during Walt's lifetime, was well documented within the family. Sharon, like Diane, was raised as part of a household defined by both privilege and discretion. Walt's protective instincts were strong. The girls attended private schools and were carefully shielded from the pressures of their father's fame. A rare but significant detail is the home environment that Walt created for his daughters. Beyond their Holmby Hills residence, Walt constructed a private miniature railroad in the backyard, known as the Carrollwood Pacific Railroad. Built in the late 1940s, this elaborate 1/8 scale railway wound through the property and became both a personal retreat for Walt and a source of childhood joy for Diane and Sharon. Photographs from the period show the daughters riding the small trains with their father, an image of Walt not as a business mogul, but as a father invested in imaginative play with his family. This personal project reflected Walt's broader vision, which later manifested in Disneyland's own railroad systems. A debated point arises when considering how closely the Disney daughters were exposed to their father's professional struggles. Some accounts describe Diane and Sharon as largely insulated from the financial and creative crises that periodically threatened the studio. Biographers sympathetic to Walt emphasize his effort to keep the burdens of his business life away from his family. Others, however, point out that the constant demands on Walt's time meant he was often absent, and the daughters inevitably became aware of the pressures surrounding him. These conflicting perspectives highlight the tension between Walt Disney as a public figure and Walt Disney as a family man. The family dynamic remained closely knit, particularly with Lillian providing the steady presence in the home. Diane, the eldest, took naturally to the role of the observant child who understood her father's creative temperament, while Sharon developed her own quieter path within the family. Both shared the bond of being daughters of a man whose imagination shaped the cultural life of millions. As they matured into adolescence, the Disney sisters' lives began to diverge. Diane's path leaned toward education and an eventual marriage that linked her to the arts and heritage world, while Sharon's journey, though equally significant, followed a more private trajectory. These differences would become clearer in the years after their father's death, when the responsibility of preserving his legacy and navigating the complexities of inheritance fell squarely upon them. Diane Marie Disney, the firstborn daughter of Walt and Lillian, lived a life deeply intertwined with her father's cultural impact, yet defined by her own values and pursuits. Born on December 18, 1933, she grew up during the explosive rise of the Disney studio. Her childhood years coincided with the premieres of films such as Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, 1937, and Bambi, 1942. She attended private schools in Los Angeles, including the Westlake School for Girls, where she was encouraged to pursue academics away from the public eye. The privacy her parents insisted upon allowed her to develop an independent sense of self before stepping into the larger public role she would later assume. The major confirmed fact of Diane's life is her marriage to Ron W. Miller in 1954. Miller, a former professional football player with the Los Angeles Rams, transitioned into the Disney family orbit when he joined Walt Disney Productions. The couple would go on to have 7 children together: Christopher, Joanna, Tamara, Jennifer, Walter, Ronald Jr., and Patrick. This large family extended Walt Disney's lineage and placed Diane in the role of both mother and cultural figurehead. Ron Miller eventually became CEO of Walt Disney Productions from 1978 to 1984, a period marked by both challenges and innovation at the company. A rare but overlooked detail about Diane's life is her influence on the preservation of her father's memory beyond the corporate structure of Disney. In the 1980s and 1990s, Diane became a central advocate for creating a museum dedicated to Walt Disney's life and work. This effort culminated in the opening of the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco's Presidio district in 2009. Though Diane passed away before its completion, she was instrumental in laying the groundwork, shaping the museum's mission to present Walt not only as a businessman, but as an artist, father, and visionary. There is a debated point surrounding Diane's relationship with the Disney company after her father's death. Some accounts emphasize her withdrawal from direct corporate involvement following the ousting of her husband Ron Miller from the CEO role in 1984, when a boardroom coup led by Roy E. Disney, Walt's nephew, installed Michael Eisner and Frank Wells as the new leadership. Supporters of Diane suggest she intentionally stepped away from corporate politics to focus on family and cultural heritage projects. Others argue that her diminished role reflected tensions within the Disney family, particularly between Diane's branch and Roy E. Disney's branch, over the future of the company. Both perspectives agree, however, that Diane's main legacy came not through executive decisions, but through her dedication to safeguarding her father's reputation. Diane's later years were marked by philanthropy and public engagement. She supported institutions such as the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, contributing alongside her mother, Lillian, whose initial $50 million donation had made the project possible. Diane also lent her voice to documentaries and interviews, offering personal recollections of Walt Disney that added warmth and humanity to the public understanding of him. Diane Disney Miller passed away on November 19, 2013, at the age of 79 in Napa, California, due to complications from a fall. Her death marked the passing of Walt Disney's last surviving biological child. Tributes recognized her not only as Walt's daughter, but also as a cultural advocate who ensured that her father's life story remained accessible to the public. Her descendants, numbering 7 children and numerous grandchildren, continue to represent one of the branches of the Disney family tree. As Diane's story came to a close, the focus inevitably turned towards Sharon May Disney, whose path was different in nature, yet equally significant in shaping how the Disney legacy unfolded across the generations. Sharon May Disney, the younger daughter of Walt and Lillian, entered the family through adoption, a fact known within their close circle, but rarely highlighted publicly during Walt's lifetime. She was born on December 31, 1936, and legally adopted by the Disneys shortly after. Raised alongside Diane, Sharon experienced the same careful protection of privacy that her father insisted upon for his family. She attended Westlake School for Girls and later studied at the University of Southern California, mirroring the upper-middle-class trajectory of many Los Angeles children of her generation. The major confirmed fact of Sharon's life is her marriage to Robert Brown in 1959. Together, they had 3 children, Victoria, Bradford, and Michelle. This marriage lasted until Robert Brown's death in 1967. 2 years later, Sharon remarried, this time to William Lund, with whom she had 2 more children, Jennifer and twins, Joanna and Michelle. Through her marriages and children, Sharon extended the Disney family line into multiple directions, her descendants playing varying roles in philanthropy, business, and private life. A rare but telling detail about Sharon's life is the degree to which she lived outside the spotlight compared to her sister Diane. While Diane became a public steward of her father's memory, Sharon kept her life primarily private, engaging in philanthropy, but avoiding sustained media attention. Nonetheless, she did serve on the board of the Walt Disney Family Foundation. showing her commitment to ensuring that her father's legacy remained accurately represented. She was also active in supporting charities, especially those related to children's health and education, reflecting values that aligned with the philanthropic vision of the broader Disney family. A debated point concerns Sharon's health and its impact on her life trajectory. Some reports indicate she struggled with illness during her adult years, particularly toward the latter half of her life, which limited her ability to take on larger public roles. Other accounts downplay this, suggesting instead that her quieter presence reflected her personal preference for privacy rather than limitation. Both perspectives agree, however, that Sharon was less publicly visible than Diane, leaving much of the Disney family's cultural advocacy to her sister. Sharon's second marriage to William Lund introduced another layer of complexity to the Disney family dynamic. Their relationship, though enduring, later became a focal point in inheritance disputes after Sharon's death. When Sharon passed away on February 16, 1993, at the age of 56, from breast cancer, she left behind not only her children, but also a contested estate. Her portion of the Disney fortune, valued in the hundreds of millions, was placed in trusts for her heirs, with stipulations that became the source of ongoing legal battles. The disputes over Sharon's estate highlighted tensions within her branch of the family. Provisions in her trust required that beneficiaries demonstrate maturity and independence before receiving distributions, conditions that some of her children challenged in court. These legal battles stretched into the 2000s and brought unwelcome publicity to a family that had historically prized discretion. Reports from outlets such as the Los Angeles Times documented conflicts between Sharon's children and trustees, revealing the difficulties of managing one of the world's largest private fortunes across generations. Despite these conflicts, Sharon is remembered within the family as warm, loyal, and deeply devoted to her children. Unlike her sister, she did not become a public figure in cultural institutions, but her descendants remain connected to the Disney name, both through inheritance and occasional involvement in philanthropic ventures. Her life story reflects the quieter, more private dimension of the Disney family, underscoring how different the paths of Walt's two daughters turned out to be. With Diane's public stewardship and Sharon's more private trajectory, the next generation of Disneys, the grandchildren, would inherit not only vast resources, but also the responsibility of carrying a name synonymous with one of the most influential cultural legacies of the 20th century. The Disney legacy entered a new phase with the generation of grandchildren, who inherited both the cultural weight of the family name and, in many cases, substantial financial resources. Between Diane and Sharon, Walt Disney's lineage extended into numerous descendants, each navigating a balance between private lives and the public expectations attached to their surname. The major confirmed fact is that Diane Disney Miller and Ron W. Miller had 7 children: Christopher, Joanna, Tamara, Jennifer, Walter, Ronald Jr., and Patrick. Sharon Disney Brown Lund, through her 2 marriages, had 5 children: Victoria, Bradford, Michelle, from her first marriage to Robert Brown, and Jennifer, along with twins Joanna and Michelle, from her second marriage to William Lund. In total, Walt Disney's 2 daughters produced 12 grandchildren, a large second generation whose lives diverged widely in terms of visibility and involvement with the Disney legacy. A rare detail, often overlooked, is that some of the grandchildren became active participants in the arts and philanthropy, following paths reminiscent of Walt's own creative spirit. For example, Tamara Diane Miller became involved in charitable causes in the Napa Valley region, reflecting her mother Diane's community-centered values. Several of the Miller children contributed to the establishment and operations of the Walt Disney Family Museum, ensuring that Diane's vision was carried out. On the other side, Sharon's children engaged in both private and public ventures, though their family name sometimes attracted legal scrutiny rather than cultural stewardship. One of the most widely publicized, debated points centers on the legal battles among Sharon's heirs. The trusts established after her death included clauses requiring beneficiaries to demonstrate maturity and fiscal responsibility before accessing large distributions. Some of Sharon's children, including Bradford Lund, contested these conditions in court, arguing that the stipulations unfairly restricted their inheritance. Trustees, on the other hand, maintained that Sharon's wishes were clear and legally binding. These disputes, reported in outlets such as the New York Times and Los Angeles Times, fueled narratives about division within the Disney heirs, contrasting with the more united front often projected by Diane's descendants. The ongoing disagreements revealed how inheritance of immense wealth can strain family ties, even within households devoted to privacy. Beyond financial disputes, several grandchildren pursued distinctive professional and personal paths. Christopher Miller engaged in creative and documentary projects, occasionally speaking about his grandfather's legacy. Walter Elias Disney Miller, named after his grandfather, became a public advocate for heritage preservation, echoing Diane's commitment to keeping Walt's memory alive in a historically accurate way. Other grandchildren maintained quieter profiles, choosing to remain largely outside the spotlight despite the prominence of their surname. The grandchildren also represented a geographical shift in the family. Diane's branch was closely tied to Northern California, particularly Napa Valley, where she and Ron Miller established a vineyard and became central figures in the regional arts community. Sharon's branch remained more dispersed, with connections in Southern California and other parts of the United States. This division in geography mirrored the differences in public involvement. Diane's family engaged with cultural institutions and community work, while Sharon's descendants became more associated with private matters and estate management. The presence of 12 grandchildren highlighted both the continuation and fragmentation of Walt Disney's bloodline. Unlike dynasties where descendants move collectively into corporate leadership, the Disney heirs largely stayed outside the executive structure of the Walt Disney Company, which by the late 20th century had become a multinational corporation, with leadership far removed from the founding family. Instead, their influence was expressed through philanthropy, heritage preservation, and, in some cases, courtroom struggles. As the grandchildren grew into adulthood and the legal questions surrounding inheritance remained unresolved. In some cases, the Disney legacy moved further into a modern era. The family name continued to carry symbolic weight, yet its meaning shifted from the central authority of Walt himself to a dispersed group of descendants living diverse and sometimes complicated lives. The final dimension of this story rests not in the private choices of family members, but in the larger structures, foundations, museums, charitable initiatives, and estates that continue to project Walt Disney's influence into the 21st century. By the late 20th and early 21st centuries, the legacy of Walt Disney had become more than a family matter. It was an institutional reality. While Diane and Sharon had lived their lives as individuals within the shadow of their father's reputation, the inheritance they passed down to their children became formalized through foundations, museums, and trusts designed to carry Walt Disney's name forward. The result was a complex blend of cultural stewardship, philanthropy, and legal dispute that continues to shape perceptions of the Disney family today. The major confirmed fact in this period is the establishment and enduring presence of the Walt Disney Family Museum in San Francisco. Opened in 2009, the museum stands as the most significant project initiated by Diane Disney Miller to honor her father. Located in the Presidio, it offers a detailed narrative of Walt Disney's life, from his Midwestern childhood to the building of his entertainment empire. Diane's children, particularly Walter Elias Disney Miller, remain active in its leadership. The museum ensures that Walt Disney's life is remembered not merely as corporate history, but as a personal story of creativity, innovation, and perseverance. A rare but noteworthy detail lies in the philanthropic commitments made by the Disney daughters and their descendants. Lillian Disney's original $50 million donation helped launch the Walt Disney Concert Hall in Los Angeles, a project completed in 2003 and widely regarded as one of the most acoustically sophisticated venues in the world. Diane further supported the arts in Napa Valley, while Sharon's heirs, despite internal legal disputes, also contributed to charitable initiatives, including children's hospitals and educational programs. These commitments reflect a continuation of Walt's underlying vision: to inspire and nurture through creativity, even if expressed outside the boundaries of the entertainment industry. A debated point concerns the role of the family in the corporate structure of the Walt Disney Company after Walt's death. Some historians argue that the company's survival and expansion under leaders such as Michael Eisner, Bob Iger, and others occurred largely because the family stepped aside, avoiding the pitfalls of dynastic leadership that often weaken family-founded corporations. Others suggest that the absence of family influence allowed the company to evolve in ways disconnected from Walt's original ethos, leaving institutions like the Family Museum as corrective voices rather than central authorities. Both interpretations highlight the unusual dynamic of a cultural empire, whose founding family became less relevant to its operations, while remaining central to its mythology. The financial legacy of Walt Disney also continues to cast a long shadow. Sharon's estate, in particular, remains one of the most publicized aspects of the family's story. Trust stipulations for her children, designed to ensure responsible stewardship of immense wealth, have produced decades of litigation. Cases involving her son, Bradford Lund, have appeared in court multiple times, with trustees and beneficiaries contesting both access to funds and interpretations of Sharon's wishes. These conflicts, widely reported in legal documents and news articles, stand as a reminder of the challenges faced by families entrusted with vast fortunes. Meanwhile, Diane's branch of the family maintains a more unified public presence. Through the museum, vineyards, and charitable ventures, her descendants have become the visible representatives of Walt Disney's family, offering public interviews and participating in cultural initiatives. Their activities underscore the contrast between the two branches of the family, one associated with heritage and philanthropy, the other more often mentioned in the context of contested inheritance. By the time of Diane's death in 2013, Walt Disney's direct daughters had both passed away. Their stories, however, continue to shape the public understanding of what it means to inherit the Disney name. The institutions they supported, from the Walt Disney Concert Hall to the Family Museum, endure as permanent markers of their choices. The disputes within Sharon's family remain ongoing, a reminder that legacy is never only about achievements, but also about how memory, wealth, and responsibility are managed across generations. Today, the Disney name is carried not by executives of the corporation, but by the descendants of Diane and Sharon, who live private lives with occasional forays into public service, philanthropy, or legal contention. The contrast between the corporate Disney empire and the family Walt left behind has only grown sharper with time, but both remain bound by his influence. As the family story enters the modern era, it is no longer a matter of two daughters navigating their father's fame, but of dozens of grandchildren and great-grandchildren living with the complex inheritance of the Disney name, a name inseparable from the history of 20th century imagination. The lives of Diane Disney Miller and Sharon May Disney reveal two distinct but connected paths that that defined Walt Disney's family legacy. Diane, the elder daughter, lived longest in the public eye, marrying into a family deeply tied to the company, raising 7 children, and ultimately becoming the chief guardian of her father's memory through institutions like the Walt Disney Family Museum. Sharon, adopted as an infant, pursued a quieter, more private path. Yet her descendants became central to the narrative of inheritance and estate management that continues to this day. Both daughters exemplified aspects of their father's vision. Diane through public preservation of his story, Sharon through philanthropy and devotion to family. Their choices shaped the way the Disney name transitioned from a personal identity to a cultural institution. At the same time, the divisions between their branches, one associated with heritage, the other with inheritance disputes, highlight the challenges of carrying forward a legacy as vast as Walt Disney's. The grandchildren and great-grandchildren now represent the continuing line of Walt Disney's family. Some work in the arts, others in philanthropy, and many live private lives far from the corporate empire their grandfather built. Yet the name remains indelibly linked to one of the most powerful cultural institutions in the world. The story of Walt Disney's daughters is not one of fairy tale perfection, but of real human lives lived in the shadow of extraordinary fame. Their paths, marked by both unity and division, preservation and conflict, reflect the enduring complexity of legacy. As long as the Walt Disney Company continues to shape global entertainment, the quiet presence of Diane, Sharon, and their descendants will remain an inseparable part of its history.